Hey everyone! Today we're going to talk about one of the biggest and most intense battles from the time of Napoleon, the Battle of Borodino. This battle happened on September 7, 1812, and it was a huge part of Napoleon's attempt to take over Russia. Even though Napoleon's French army technically won, the battle was extremely close and incredibly bloody. In fact, more people were killed or hurt in this one day than in any other battle during the Napoleonic Wars. And it all started on June 24, 1812, when Napoleon led a massive army, over 600,000 soldiers, across the Niemen River into Russia. This army wasn't just French. It had people from all over Europe: Poland, Austria, Prussia, Germany, Italy, Spain, and more. But Napoleon didn't want to take over all of Russia. What he really wanted was to force the Russian ruler, Tsar Alexander I, to go back to following his plan to block trade with Britain. Napoleon thought he could beat the Russian army quickly and make Alexander give in within a few weeks. But the Russians had a different plan. They had about 250,000 soldiers in the west, split into three different armies. One of the main leaders, Mikhail Barclay de Tolly, decided not to fight Napoleon right away. Instead, he told his troops to keep backing up deeper into Russia, while burning crops, destroying supplies, and leaving nothing for Napoleon's army. This made it really hard for Napoleon's soldiers to find food or shelter, and it also made them tired and sick. Still, many Russian soldiers were upset about always retreating and blamed Barclay, who wasn't originally Russian, for not caring enough about their country. By the end of July, the French had taken over cities like Vilna and Minsk, but they still hadn't fought a major battle. And Napoleon's army was already shrinking fast. In just 1 month, he lost about 100,000 soldiers because of disease, hunger, and people running away. Finally, Barclay was pressured to fight at a place called Smolensk in mid-August. The battle was rough, and the city ended up burning. Lots of soldiers died, around 22,000, but Barclay ordered another retreat to save his army. That retreat made many people angry. The Russian leaders and army wanted someone else in charge, someone who truly represented Russia. That's when they picked Mikhail Kutuzov, an older general who had been through a lot of wars and was respected by both the soldiers and nobles. Even though the Tsar wasn't a huge fan of Kutuzov, he knew the people trusted him. Kutuzov became the new commander on August 29, and it really boosted everyone's spirits. Kutuzov knew that they couldn't let Moscow fall without a fight. The city wasn't just a capital, it meant everything to the Russian people. As the army moved closer to Moscow, they looked for a good place to stop and defend. They chose Borodino, a small village to the west. The area had lots of hills, rivers, and forests, which made it great for defense. The Russians built strong forts, including one called the Great Redoubt, and 3 smaller ones called Flesh, after General Bagration. Before the big battle, there was a smaller but fierce fight at Shevardino on September 5. While the Russians were moving into position, the French attacked one of their forts. Russian soldiers, led by Prince Gorchakov and the 27th Division, fought hard to hold it. They eventually had to retreat, but not before causing heavy damage. That fight killed or wounded about 6,000 Russians and 4,000 French soldiers. After that, the Russian left side of the army had to quickly set up a new line of defense, near a place called Atitsa. On the day before the big battle, September 6, 1812, things seemed quiet, but everyone knew a huge fight was coming. On the Russian side, General Kutuzov tried to keep his soldiers' spirits up. He brought out a special religious icon, the Smolensk Mother of God, and had it shown to the troops. For many Russians, this war was about more than land. It was about their families, homes, and beliefs. That icon reminded them why they were fighting. The Russian army was spread out across a big area. On the right they were near 2 rivers. On the left, they were near a village called Atitsa. In the middle was a village named Borodino. General Barclay's First Army was on the right, General Bagration's Second Army was on the left, and Borodino was where both armies met. The Russians had built strong defenses. General Raevski's men were in the center at a spot called the Great Redoubt. and General Borodino's men were guarding arrow-shaped forts called Flesh. Kutuzov stayed behind the lines, watching everything with his 120,000 soldiers and over 600 cannons. In the French camp, there were no prayers. Instead, Napoleon gave a message full of pride and hope. He even put a picture of his young son, the King of Rome, outside his tent to inspire the soldiers. Napoleon was deep in Russian territory and didn't want to take big risks. One of his commanders, Marshal Davout, suggested a surprise night attack, but Napoleon said no. He chose a straight-on attack instead. Some people think he was too sick to think clearly. He had a fever and bladder problems. Still, his army was huge. More than 100,000 foot soldiers, 28,000 cavalry, and nearly 600 cannons. On the morning of September 7th, the battle began. At 6 a.m., 100 French cannons started firing at the Russian center. The quiet was broken. Just 30 minutes later, Napoleon's stepson, Prince Eugène, led French troops into Borodino. The fog helped them surprise the Russian guards and take the village. But when they tried to go farther, Russian reinforcements stopped them. By 7:30 a.m., they had to dig in and defend their spot. At the same time, Davout's troops attacked the Flesh. He sent 22,000 of his best men through the woods. Russian cannons hit them hard, but they kept going. The fighting was super intense. One Russian group fought until every soldier was gone. General Borodino was killed. The French took the Flesh for a little while, but Bagration led a counterattack and pushed them back. Davout was hurt, and the general who took his place also got injured. All that fighting for a few muddy forts. Because the Flesh were so important, Bagration had to move soldiers from other areas to help. This made the Russian left side, near Utitsa, weaker. That's when Prince Poniatowski and 10,000 Polish soldiers attacked. They took Utitsa for a bit, but the Russians pushed them out again. During this fight, General Tuchkov, who led the Russian left side, was killed. The battle for Utitsa lasted all day. Back in the middle, Eugène had taken Borodino and spent 2 hours firing cannons at the Great Redoubt. At 8:30 a.m., his troops rushed in and kicked out the Russians. But the Russians fought back hard. In the chaos, General Kutuzov, who was in charge of the cannons, was killed. Without him, the Russian artillery wasn't as strong. During the fight for the Flesh, Bagration was hit by shrapnel and badly hurt. He would later die. His injury made the Russian army feel low, and they lost the Flesh. French cavalry attacked, but the Russians pulled back behind a small valley and held their ground. French leader Murat kept charging, but the Russians wouldn't break. Murat asked Napoleon to send in the elite Imperial Guard, but Napoleon said no. Even Davout, Ney, and Eugène agreed they should be sent, but Napoleon still refused. Historians wonder if things would have changed if he had. Around noon, the Russians got a break. General Uvarov led 8,000 cavalry in a surprise attack behind Eugène's troops. It didn't beat the French, but it slowed them down. This gave the Russians time to strengthen the Great Redoubt. At 2 p.m., the French attacked again. 400 cannons fired, and 3 groups of soldiers charged. Eugène attacked from the front, and General Caulaincourt led a cavalry charge from behind. Caulaincourt was killed, but the plan worked. The French took the redoubt. Even after losing the redoubt, General Barclay had a backup plan. He set up another defensive line farther back. Eugène couldn't move forward anymore. Napoleon's commanders again begged him to send the guard, and again he said no. The Russians were badly hurt but not beaten. They pulled back and formed a new line. The French were too tired to fight more. After 12 hours, the battle finally ended. The results were shocking. Over 70,000 soldiers were killed or hurt. It was the bloodiest day in the Napoleonic Wars. The French lost about 32,000 men, which was a big deal for an army so far from home. The Russians lost around 45,000, including 22 generals. Bagration later died from his wounds. That night, Kutuzov knew he couldn't face another battle like that. He moved his army back to the town of Fili, near Moscow. On September 13th, Russian commanders met in Philly to decide what to do: fight for Moscow or save the army. Most wanted to fight, but Kutuzov knew better. If they stayed, the army could be destroyed, and Moscow would fall anyway. So he made the tough choice to retreat. Moscow was evacuated, and on September 15th, Napoleon entered the city. But taking the city didn't mean the war was over. Napoleon waited for peace talks that never came. On October 18th, he gave up and told his army to retreat. That's when things got really bad. Winter hit, Russian troops kept attacking, and the French ran out of food. When the survivors finally crossed the Niemen River in December, they had lost over 500,000 men. It was a disaster Napoleon never recovered from.